Hi everyone, this is Karak from Angry Centaur Gaming, bringing you the lowdown and dirty on games since the Atari 2600, and today I bring you the first impressions of a game where the first impressions might end up being the review, because how many times do you have to burn the roof of your mouth on a piece of pizza before you put it down and intelligently say, enough is enough? And as you probably know, that game is The Crew. We're about 6+ hours into the game, and I have to say I have now seen some shit, so I figured I'd put the video out for my first impressions. Let's check it out. Graphics are up first because despite what anyone says, it doesn't take 40 hours of game time for light to travel to your fucking eyes or for the human mind to figure out if something's going to be fun or not. So here we go. First, though the game does run at 30 frames per second, which allows it to put some cool stuff on the screen, including explosions, special effects like somewhat real-time damage, and throw random trains and boatloads of traffic at you at any time, there are some issues. For example, the anti-aliasing shimmers like a fucking UFO landing at Roswell, and everything has this odd crystalline look to it that even makes the trees look a bit wonky at times. While sometimes the damage on the vehicles looks good, at other times it looks like someone took a pixelated finger and rubbed it down the side of a vehicle and someone else said, hey, that looks like a scratch, let's just use that. Pop-in is fairly terrible in some spots, with forests cropping up like green mirages and city locations flicking into view like a magician showing you their card. However, at other times, when you're just sitting back, driving, and taking in the look of the world, the game has some fantastic vistas and color usage. And I challenge anyone to drive the West Coast at sunrise and not dig that orange glow flitting through the trees as you go across the Pacific Northwest. However, just when you see something nice, the game leaps forward like it's in a race to show you how ugly it can be with low-res textures in various places, a couple frame drops here and there, and then boom, half a forest pops into view. Hey, at least in The Crew, the cars don't suddenly change entire type like the gender-swapping revolutionaries of Unity. Oh, wait, actually, that does happen here. You see, because in The Crew, trees will flip between snow-covered, then normal, then back to snow-covered. In fact, one of the oddest graphical effects occurs with trees. They will many times appear fine in the distance, shimmer completely away, and then boom, back and pop up into existence perfectly. This is all on the PS4. Overall, it is good, but it has some heavy concessions here and there with the pop-in and the low-res textures at times. Sound, music, and voice. Sounds are excellent with all the cars having a unique sound as well as the great overall response to the gas pedal which you'd expect in a game like this. It does a good job eliciting a feeling of speed. Sure, some of the sounds are tinny and high, but when you shoot in front of a train barely inching past it before it pancakes you into steel oblivion, the sound of the police sirens fading away is one of those things that you just sort of sit back and you're like, man, that was actually pretty fun. It's really hard not to be impressed at those points. Sure, a couple of the cars do sound like someone's beatboxing their engine and pretending it's a real car, but most of them sound great, and thundering into the front of another vehicle at illegal speed seems to sound about as accurate as James Dean would have liked it to be. Karak tested, James Dean approved. Music. Well, as with almost everything in this game, the music is hit and miss, with different stations offering a named mixture of music and instrumentals that many times will have you pop in your head during one slalom of high-speed corners, but the next section you'll wonder how cats got into your speakers and why they're summoning Cthulhu. It's just an overall terrible mix of different stations, and I felt that mostly, maybe about 80% of the stations fit a racing game. Now, because it's music and because you have different stations, I think that some people will actually enjoy it more, and some people, unfortunately, even less. But overall, I'd say 70 to 80% of the stations I will never ever listen to in a racing game. Just not the overall right pacing for that kind of game. Voice. Bad. This is someone's idea of cool. No, this is actually what you feel when you watch someone else do something they think is cool, and you get that feeling in the pit of your stomach that says, man, I wish I could be anywhere else but here. In fact, the game reeks of Imposter, like that joke buddy movie where they both go undercover as cops but end up looking like two guys trying to be cops. Is 24 Jump Street gangster talk bad. Except here is some kind of middle-aged guy's idea of racing culture, any culture for that matter. And then strain through a translator of PG-13 shit until you get a watered-down version of the Fast and Furious as experienced by the Nielsen's rating board. Normally this wouldn't matter, but the damn game seems to think that cutscenes and story matter to it, and so it just throws it to you the entire time. Overall, really bad. Gameplay. You drive around, enter a fairly unambitious and awkward story to further the main game and unlock cars. Doing this takes you through an assortment of various mission types like race, race alone, race with others, and smash others while racing. The Crew does its best to make you think you're doing something else by pretending that these races are mixed up and involved in some real-world gangster shit. But in the end, it's just driving and racing, and it makes you wonder if the game would have actually been served better if the developers hadn't thought that mixing in Copland into the racing game was some kind of award-level thinking. All this you can also do with all the others in the online modes, competing and even playing in co-op modes with anybody else who owns the game. The problems begin almost instantly. First, a single-player game suffers from cardus coitus interruptus, which is horse Latin for interruptions every 12 seconds for cutscenes. It's a racing game. Is there going to be racing in a racing game? Maybe. But we know there will be cell towers to unlock, like a four-wheeled neon-painted Assassin's Creed. However, what does happen is pop-and-stop gameplay experience in the first 4 to 6 hours that feels disjointed and ultimately doesn't serve to make you feel like it's much of a racing game as a game where racing happens in between cutscenes and giant flashing text boxes on the screen. You see, the HUD is a monster of Greek legend, a multi-headed monster that demands death via cutting off entire segments so that you can see the treasure behind it. But what's behind it seems to be turning out to not be a treasure. Instead, it's a styrofoam cooler filled with cheap beer and a single 1980s mixtape of what people think gangsters should sound like. Upgrades and new cars are handled by leveling up, and the game throws you items and upgraded parts when you win, like the losing driver just tore his turbo off his car and flung at you in disgust. It doesn't make much sense, but it does work for the most part, and there are a good assortment of cars and items to customize even just 6 to 8 hours into the game. Now here's where the game sort of gets a little rough. The various views of the game lets the driver choose all the fairly standard views. However, some odd gameplay differences are popping up in our testing. For example, in the cockpit view, the game seemed to really handle better, and though that might be some kind of dropped frame issues when you're in the exterior view, it didn't look like it. It just felt different. The experience actually felt different in the cockpit view, and not just because of how you were looking at the world. Then while testing, something else incredibly odd happened. In third-person view, if you drove recklessly around the cops, they began chasing you fairly quickly. In combat mode, various times cop cars were smashed into and they did nothing. That's right, they drove right by like they were off duty on their way to a SWAT team luncheon. It was the oddest difference I've seen in a racing game, and I would need more time to truly test it, but right now it was an 8 to 1 or maybe a 10 to 1 difference in the times you get chased. That just seems almost impossible to be anything other than a bug or a game design choice, but I couldn't figure out why they had done it. Additionally, inside the cockpit, the rearview mirrors didn't work, which is funny, as that was of course the one place I would have wanted them to work. Fun factor, honestly, driving in the free drive mode is very cool at times and was probably the funnest I had in the game. Not all the time, but sometimes, and when it's fun and atmospheric, it has a great exploration vibe to it. Everything else was sort of unfun. That's right, the missions, the way the cars handled, the way the game played, it just flatly was not that fun for me. So what does the crew get right currently? It has a stunning array of options. Its graphics when in free drive are fairly good, and the feeling of driving is there. Sound is good, and again, I just have to say, exploration, it really does have an overall good feel. What does the crew get wrong currently? You enter into a mission and the game just sort of falls apart, and the fun is sucked out of it by various issues with the HUD, with how it actually controls, and just the overall presentation is just sort of poor. Graphics pop-in is insane at times. That is unbelievable pop-in at times. Also with graphical issues like the rearview mirrors and such not working. And the music is hit and miss. So that's it. As you know, I'm normally reviewing a game by now, and it's on a buy, rent, wait for a sale, or never talk about it again rating scale. I can't do that with this game. I'm only 6 to 8 hours in, and I haven't really got to experience the multiplayer, but 6 to 8 hours in, this game is not really that fun. Now the game may suddenly get awesome, the graphics may somehow magically fix themselves, and the music might staggeringly get better. But 6 hours in, and I can say that despite not playing with friends yet, I have actually no desire to. And you can take that as you will. I'll update this with a full review at a later time. Those are my first impressions. Peace out.